Hello and welcome to the second part of the Elevate 2018 Keynote presentation. Hi, I'm Chris Pollock. I'm the Director of Development here at Appeon. And it's my pleasure today to go through the new features of PowerBuilder 2017 Revision 2 and Revision 3. I don't have any PowerPoint slides for this presentation. I've actually built a PowerBuilder 2017 application, and it's going to go through the key features that were added to these revisions and use cases of how you can practically use these new features in your everyday PowerBuilder applications. Returning to the PowerBuilder 27 IDE, notice that this actual application itself is actually managed by the Git source code management. And we can actually pull this application from the Git repository, be able to pull this source code down into our workspace working area. Notice that the Git support and SVN source code management support were added in PowerBuilder Revision 2 and enhanced in PowerBuilder Revision 3. So let's have a look at this example application. The first is the JSON data window. In this case, we have a standard two-tier client server data window object, and it's retrieving data from the SQL Anywhere database. However, our management came to us and said that we need to export information here from our organization to another organization just using simple flat files. So I need to JSON enable this because that's what the actual organization on the other side is expecting. So I need to export this in JSON format. So I need to JSON enable this data window for both export and import because the other organization is going to send us data as well in JSON format. And it may be very complex format as well. So first of all, let's actually generate the export. So in this example here, it's going to ask us for an output file. So I'll choose export.json here. And then basically having a look here at File Manager in Windows 10, let's have a look at this file. And we can see here that the contact information from the two-tier data window has been actually exported in JSON format. Notice that we can also import data in JSON format. So I'm going to click on this file, chris.json. This represents contact information coming from the other outside organization, and I can import that into the data window buffer and then call the update. So from this message box at the update end event, notice that we get the status that one role was inserted into the SQL Anywhere database. And if we retrieve the information back from the database, and we do a filter in the data window, we can see here that this new information is being returned from SQL Anywhere. Also, that we may want to retrieve the information from the database, and we may want to actually send it to another organization in PDF format. In previous releases of PowerBuilder, you could not specify the actual PDF type, so none was the default. However, now you can see in the newer PowerBuilder, we can select, for example, 1A, 3A, 3B, or for example, the PDF type, and then we can actually generate a PDF. Returning to File Manager, the PDF that's generated is export.pdf. And if I double click that, notice that if I open up the Adobe Acrobat Reader, now there's a new information message at the top indicating that what type of PDFA standard was applied to this particular PDF file. Also, we can specify a password as well to be added to the PDF. So we're going to do exactly the same thing and export the data in PDF format. Notice that when I open up the export file this time, however, there is a password requirement. So we need to be able to put in the password in order to view the data here in Adobe Reader. And if we enter the right password, then we can proceed. So let's look at the code behind all of this. So returning to the PowerBuilder IDE, let's have a look at the code behind the export button. Notice here basically we're just doing a for next loop, reading the actual column information from the data window control, either doing a get item number or a get item string. And then we have a new object class called the Json Generator, in which we basically either do an add item number or an add item string to add it to its buffer. Notice at the end we call the Json Generator to basically get the resulting JSON string, which has all the data in JSON format, and then we can write that to a flat file. If we look at the import button, we can see here that it's basically the same thing. The difference, however, is we're just looping through the JSON data, and we're doing that because the JSON data has been loaded into a new object class called the JSON parser. And from the JSON parser, we do a get item string from that buffer into the data window control using a set item. We do that in a loop. And at the end, of course, then the data window control has been populated. Typically, we would use this technique of looping for export and import, also when the JSON result set is very complex. Let's have a look behind the code of the PDF button. This is very easy here. Notice that we can apply in now a PDF standard for PDF 1A through 3U standard. And also we can assign a password. In this case, the user password is Chris. Notice the key here is that in order for a user password to work, a master password must also be assigned to the data window object, and then the export to PDF will hold true for the password itself. If we don't supply a password, then none is asked for. The next part of the 2017 R3 features is the RESTful data window itself. Notice that we have two ways to actually handle a RESTful data window, using either the new HTTP client class or the RESTful client class. Why would I use the HTTP client? This is where the JSON data stream is very complex, and I need to be able to handle that complex data stream via programming. In this example here, we can see the URLs. This URL, for example, returns us all the state information for the country United States of America. If I call that actual web service, you'll notice here that we actually get response information and heading information from the RESTful Web API, and then the data itself comes back in JSON format. And I can call the import button here to actually take that data and drop it into a client server data window, and then we can process that as we normally would. However, the other thing is we could actually call a RESTful client. This is useful when the JSON result set is coming back in a simplex format, in this case, a standard row column. So we can handle that directly by using the new RESTful client. What this does is actually communicates to the data window control. It basically gets the JSON from the RESTful Web API and then parses it directly into the data window buffer, all in one command. So let's have a look here, for example, of calling this one. This is going to be the book one here, and it's going to call that particular web service. Notice that the data is being redirected directly into the data window control, so the retrieve start event is fired, and then the retrieve end event is fired, letting us know that there's 100 rows in the buffer at this point. Or we may be looking, for example, for country names, and this is this RESTful Web API here, and we'll call the web service. Again, it's returning us 25 rows. Notice that this is in real time, so if I change that from 25 to 50, and I call the web service again, notice the retrieve end indicates 50 rows that have been added to the data window buffer. So this is basically a very convenient way of taking two-dimensional data, rows and columns, and pumping it directly into a data window object. Let's look at the code behind all of this. So returning to the PowerBuilder IDE, when we call a web service, which is returning a very complex JSON data stream, notice that we can use the new HTTP client class. We can issue the command send request, and that RESTful Web API is called, and the data is actually returned to us in raw JSON format into a variable, in this case ls data. If we use the RESTful client class, which is a new object class in PowerBuilder 2017 R3, notice we can use the retrieve command on that and just pass in the address of the data window control and the address or URL of the RESTful Web API. Then notice the JSON data comes back and is basically unpackaged directly into the data window buffer, all within one method call. Returning to the example application, let's have a look at the packaging feature. In this example, we've retrieved two data windows, a product data window and a contact data window, and we need to send that to the RESTful server. Issuing the send data command here, you notice that one round trip is being done to be able to basically package the product information into a JSON data stream and then send it over to the RESTful server. And then a second call is done to call the second API, passing in the contact information. So we can see here after these two round trips, the information is basically sent from the client to the server side. However, this is not efficient. Let's say, for example, we have 5, 6, or even 10 data window objects that we need to be able to send. We don't want to do 10 round trips. So we can use the packaging context here, which is the third API that I'm going to call, and I can use the send package command. And then basically everything is sent in one round trip. Notice that there's a logical header at the top, which indicates this JSON result set pertains to contact information. If we scroll down a little bit further, we notice that there's another logical piece of JSON information which represents the product information. So these two logical result sets are put together in a package and then sent in one call to the RESTful server. And then notice that if we actually clear the data windows on the left-hand side, that we can actually get the data back from the RESTful server using that same packaging technique. So all the data for these various data windows is brought to us in one call, and then we can logically dissect it into the appropriate data window object. Let's look at the code now behind this. So returning to the PowerBuilder 2017 IDE, let's have a look at the send package. This is very easy to do in PowerBuilder 2017 using the package object, which is a new object class. And notice that we can use a set value specifying a logical name and saying get all the data from a particular data window control, use the new export JSON method, and basically pull that result set and put a logical name around it. The next thing we do is a set value again, specifying the same thing, products, and product information from the export JSON command in the DC products data window control. This produces a package, and then we can call the package object getJSON string, returns us in those two logical result sets within that package, and then we can send it over to the RESTful Web API. Let's have a look at the code behind the get data. This is information now coming back from the RESTful server itself. Notice that we can actually then use the actual packaging object again, issuing a get value saying get me all the JSON values for the logical label context, and get me all the JSON data for the logical label products, and then take that JSON and then appropriately drop it in the appropriate data window control. All within one easy command, get value. Next thing we want to have a look at is the packaging state information. Again, we've been able to retrieve information from a data window, which may have come from the RESTful server. But now we're going to change some information. For example, Jane to Janet, Larry to Lawrence, and maybe Susan to Sue. Now what I want to be able to do, however, is send only those changes back to the RESTful server. So I can again do that. Now, if the RESTful server does not understand a data window object, this is all you need to do. However, the problem is that the RESTful server will have to re-retrieve all the information and check the status flags of this way of handling the data buffer. This can get quite complex. Notice, however, that we can also provide metadata. This is useful now when you've built the RESTful server using the new PowerBuilder C# Web API. Either the model store or the data store knows how to handle the result set of a data window object. So now when I select metadata and send the changes, not only is just the change data sent, but also information about those columns and also the row and column flags are sent as well. So now the RESTful server can reconstruct a data window object on its side of the fence and then just process the update command just like we do here in the regular PowerBuilder client, making updates, inserts, and deletes much simpler to handle. Also, on the other flip side of the coin, the RESTful server can get information that it's changed and then just send those changes back to the client. And we can do that via the import. And only those changes are brought back, and the row and column status information is done as well because metadata is being requested. Let's look at the code behind this. So returning to the PowerBuilder 2017 IDE, let's have a look at the script behind the send package. This is very easy to do. Notice that if metadata is checked, that means that there is a data window smart capability in the RESTful API on the server. Then we can basically call the set value, providing a logical name here, and then these arguments here tell us to be able to actually send the row and column information as well. If the RESTful Web API on the other side of the fence on the server does not understand that, notice that we just changed the arguments from false true to false false, and then the state information of the row and column is not sent, and we assume that the RESTful API, whatever language it's written in, can handle that by re-retrieving the data and then comparing the changes from the current buffer to its data buffer. But it's a lot easier if the other side also understands a model store or a data store. Then we can just basically send the metadata using a true. And that makes it a lot easier then to handle on the other side of the fence. So having a look at the import button, this is simulating information coming from the server, coming back to the client. Notice we can use the new packaging class, again, using getValue to actually extract the logical contents and then do an import JSON. Now, if the metadata has been supplied from the RESTful server over to the PowerBuilder client, then that row and column information is also being handled when we call the import JSON command. And we do exactly the same thing for products. Get the logical data. If the metadata has been provided, do an import JSON, and again, you get just the changed information and the row and column status flags, and then do your normal data window object processing from that point on. So our last feature that we want to talk about is the O authorization. This is different than what we've done before because the HTTP client and the RESTful client, you can use different encryption methods, and we can select those new encryption methods here, the features that have been added in the PowerBuilder 2017. Notice, however, this is not encryption. What we're talking about here in O authorization is security. So I want to call a particular API, and I want to be able to basically get the screen name from Twitter in this example, screen name being the handle. I can fudge the information, such as, for example, this is a bearer token, and trust me, this is the actual token information. Okay, but there's a lot more to that. A lot more binary information or secret decoder information has to be supplied before the RESTful API will actually converse with you. It doesn't trust you basically at this point in time. So what we're going to do now is we're basically going to call an O authorization server. That server basically has our username and password and some kind of secret decoder information. And if you supply those pieces, it'll provide you with a security token. In other words, it trusts you based on this token. If I can then call the actual web API, RESTful API, using that token, notice that it lets me in because it now trusts me at this point. And now, for example, we can find out what is the Appeon handle, for example, on Twitter and information about it. Notice that this information is being returned to us in JSON format and in a very complex data stream. So we wouldn't use the RESTful data window at this point. We actually have to use the JSON parser to be able to parse this out into logical context. Because it's coming close to Christmas, let's also check what's happening with Santa Claus here. And he happens to actually have a handle as well. I believe Mrs. Claus does as well. And notice that he has 78,082 followers at this point. But of course, as we get closer to Christmas, I'm sure that's going to go up into the millions. So that's the end of my practical examples of the new features of PowerBuilder 2017. I hope you've enjoyed these contextual examples and enjoy the rest of the Elevate conference. Thanks for watching.